Hi, I'm Kevin Harrington.
I'm Samba Bachili.
Nina Vaca, Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Group.
An original shark from the hit TV show Shark Tank.
CEO of ADS Group.
The largest Latina-owned workforce solutions in America.
I first identified myself as an entrepreneur when I was 15 years old.
My mother and father immigrated here with a suitcase and a dream. I had a front row seat to entrepreneurship. I am living proof of what is possible in this country.
Today, the marketplace is very tough.
The challenge for African market today is its access to capital.
The number one reason why we can't scale as entrepreneurs is access to capital.
What makes Glow so different and so powerful is the access to experts, gurus, mentors, coaches, financiers, venture people, money.
When I started my business, I immediately went to engage with different communities, different platforms. Glow makes that experience digital. A digital platform makes it so much faster and so much easier for you to meet like-minded people.
The financial platform that Glow have that make Glow unique.
Glow is about commerce, Glow is about community, and Glow is about having access to capital.
Glow is an asset to every entrepreneur in this country and globally.
It's about helping you take your business, your idea to the next step.
Hello and welcome to Business Acceleration 2.0. My name is Michelle Lemons-Pacenti and I'm the host of the show Where Leaders Go to Grow. It's brought to you by the Global Leaders Organization, or GLOW as we like to call it. It's a membership organization that's made for the entrepreneur. So if you're looking for a community where there's like-minded peers, where you can go and network with one another, do business with one another, if you're looking for an organization where you can actually grow your business by doing transactions, and if you're ever in the need of capital, GLOW has the ability to assist you in finding that right capital. So join GLOW. Go to withglow.com and become a member. I'd like to thank our other sponsor, the Business Finishing School. It's an online program that allows the entrepreneur to grow their business, make it more profitable, sustainable, and saleable. Well, let's face it, as an entrepreneur, we all want to be able to sell our business at some point. And even if we don't want to sell it, it's awfully nice when someone comes to us that wants to buy it. So go to businessfinishingschool.com and check out their online program that will help take your company to the next level. It has 48 modules, over 100 videos, very interactive. I've actually gone through the program. It's a fantastic program. So businessfinishingschool.com. And then finally, we're doing these programs every week, and we want to make sure that when you're tuning in, that you pass them and share them with other entrepreneurs that you know. Part of GLOW's message is to build an organization and reach over 1 million entrepreneurs and help them grow their business by 25%. 25%. It's not an easy task, but we're in the game, and we're here to make that happen. So be sure and share these programs, make them available to other entrepreneurs that you know. Great content. We've got over 100 some odd hours of different interviews from thought leaders like Mark Cuban or Kevin Harrington. We've got them from celebrities that have gone into business like Pitbull and Akon. We've got stories from Molly Bloom that tells her own personal journey from that she, they made the movie about Molly's Game, about her life. But the list just goes on and on of different thought leaders, celebrities, best-selling authors, and individuals that are industry experts. So be sure and check out all the different videos that we have available to you that come to you every Thursday. All right, so today you're here to hear from our guest, Mr. Sonny Vanderbeck. Sonny is a really interesting gentleman. He comes from quite a varied background. He was in the military. From the military, he went and began working at Microsoft. Saw an opportunity while he was working at Microsoft to go in and create his own company, start his company, built his company to be quite an impressive company. I think he was the youngest individual to be on the New York Stock Exchange, not on the New York Stock Exchange, on Sonny, you're going to have to jump in here. And
NASDAQ.
NASDAQ, that's right. Youngest person in NASDAQ. And sold his company, bought his company back, sold it again, And now he has Satori Capital, which is a firm that really works with companies to look at investing in different businesses, but really helping them grow. They look at companies that are more in the spectrum of conscious capitalism. So we're going to hear what that means and understand how Sonny's background has taken him to where he is. And he's going to be sharing a lot of his experiences with us today to help you grow as an entrepreneur. So, Sonny, welcome and thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. So, as I said, you've got a very varied background, and I love the fact that you built a company, then you sold a company, you bought it back, and then you sold it again. So there's quite a bit I know that you learned throughout that process. Conscious capitalism was a part of it. Can we start there and just start diving in as to why that became an important spectrum for you?
Sure. Yeah. That time was a pretty wild ride to go public and sell it and realized I sold it to the wrong person and buy it back later. So this idea around conscious capitalism, maybe let me frame that up a little bit first. Like, what does that mean? I'm gonna give you the short version of it. Profit is not a measure of extraction about what you can take from a business. Like over the long term, profit's actually a measure of value creation. Can I create value for my customers? Can I create value for my employees? Can I create value for my suppliers and my community? And so I had this experience as a CEO where I had to work a lot with the capital markets, with investors, just the nature of our business, both when we were private and then we went public. I spent a lot of my time with the investment community. And the experience I had was that mostly they only cared about short-term profit. That was kind of all that really mattered. But my experience inside my company was all these other things mattered. Culture mattered a lot. The way customers loved the company or didn't love the company mattered a lot. The way I dealt with the supplier mattered a lot. And so I kept having this experience where my actual personal experience was, hey, if I did things with a longer term mindset and I actually cared about these different, what we call stakeholders in the business, I got really good results. And when I only cared about short term profit, I might get good results for a little bit and they would start to drift over time. And so the idea here is really that all these things are connected, right? The long-term performance of a business will ultimately reflect how good of a job it does, not just for its customers, but for its team members and its suppliers and its community. And so the genesis of Satori Capital, Randy's my co-founder. Randy was also a CEO, and he and I did what we call now business dating. We spent a couple hours a week together for years. And it started out kind of complaining about the investment crowd. We're like, hey, here's what we're seeing. We don't like it. And eventually, as entrepreneurs do, we say, well, we're probably not the only ones with this problem. Instead of complaining about it, let's go fix it. And so that was the genesis of Satori Capital, to say, can we build a firm around this idea of our purpose to create, fund, and inspire businesses that elevate humanity? Can we blaze a trail and actually show the investment community that this is not only okay, but it works? It actually works. If you have really happy customers, really happy employees, you care about them, you deal with things over the long term, you get better investment returns. And so part of the whole point of the thing was not just to do the investing, but to actually show the world that, hey, this works and it works better, and maybe to make it easier for other investment firms someday to start with this same mindset.
That's wonderful. Okay, in your book, Selling Without Selling Out, you talk about in preparation to sell your business, you really need to prepare yourself, right? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we like to think as leaders, we're sort of emotionally insulated from reality and from the business. And, you've got the up times and the down times, and eventually you get some resilience and, I can deal with that. I don't need to think about that. Like, here's the truth. There are only a few events in your life that are irrevocable. Like, you can even get a tattoo off. But by and large, selling a business is a one-way street. You only get to do it once. You don't get a do-over. Like, I got super lucky. I got a do-over on it. Don't make that part of your plan. And so, like, step number one is figure out, what are you actually trying to accomplish? It's really easy to get caught up in, well, I want to sell my business. Okay. Like, why? What are you solving for? And by the way, I'm going to use sale here. What that really means, it could be anything from 100% sale over here to, I sold 20% of the company to an investor because I'm trying to get capital to grow. The same questions become important. Question number one, what is it that I actually am trying to accomplish? And it seems like, oh, well, that question's really obvious. And so my next question is, well, okay, write it down then. If you can actually get clear enough in your thinking to write it down. And I know for me, it's much easier as an entrepreneur to talk than to go write something down. What I've learned is that I have real clarity in my thinking if I can actually write it down. So you're going to hear me kind of repeat that a few times about, hey, go write it down. What are you trying to solve for? And let me give you an example. One of the things you might be trying to solve for is, hey, I'm completely burned out. Like I've spent the last decade of my life running 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I actually need a break. I can't go any harder anymore. And so that would tell you, you probably don't want to find a financial type sponsor who, when they invest in the business or buy, 60% of it, when the transaction closes, you're like, wow, we're done now. And they're like, hey, it's day one. We're excited. We love you. We love your business. We got a lot to do together. Let's go. And you're tired. That's a really bad combination. So if you could be really honest about what you really want out of the transaction, that might tell you I may be better off selling to a strategic where they're going to buy the whole company. They don't really need me, and off I go. I'll give you another example in here. If you sell to a strategic and your desire is to stay on, you got to really understand the nature of that job. So, to be specific, sometimes I see CEOs say, look, part of the reason I want to do this is because I want to spend more time with my family. Well, if that's true, and headquarters of your acquirer is in another city very far away, and you're going to run the new business unit and you've got this big important job, guess what? You're going to headquarters. You're going to be getting on a plane, flying to Chicago or New York or Boston or wherever away is, and spending a lot of time there. So again, back to the beginning, getting really clear about what it is that you want out of this. I'll add another thing here. Sometimes as leaders, we tend to put the needs of our organization and the needs of our team and our customers ahead of our own needs and ahead of our family's needs. It happens. It's part of the trade-off. It's very real. This is one of those times where understanding what you need for yourself and understanding what you need for your family are important inputs.
Okay, so that's great information. Just thinking about that when you're looking for that group that's either going to buy your company or invest in your business, you talk about values, and we talk about values a lot inside of Glow as well, and making that right match. Give some examples of what you've seen that have worked well and maybe some that haven't worked so well.
Yeah, I'll give a not so well first. And I talk about this a little bit in the book. I had a CEO friend who had this really successful company in Austin, insurance business. And he ultimately decided it was time to sell the business. He sold the business and he stayed on to run that office. And things were going pretty well for a while. He had gone through, most of the questions and figured it out. And then one day HR came down, and then they're from corporate, and they're like, we're here to help. We've noticed some of our corporate policies you're not following, and we're going to start with the dress code.
Ooh.
So imagine you're in the insurance business, which is by and large a relatively traditional, conservative dressing crowd. And part of what made this company work was they said, look, we're not going to do that. Like we're jeans and a t-shirt or jeans and a polo shirt, but we're going to have a relaxed, casual environment, which also very appropriate for Austin as a market. And that was one of the attractors. That was one of the things that brought people to the company. And I think a lot of cases, the culture actually for them was downstream of the dress code. The dress code was a marker of how they wanted to relate to each other. So corporate shows up and they're like, hey, guess what? You need to do our dress code now. Please start wearing a tie to work. You can imagine the chaos inside that office and the feeling that, ex-CEO had when it was just one of the things he didn't ask.
Yeah.
He never asked, hey, let's talk about this dress code thing. It's important to us. And that, as an example, might be something that is so important to you, you actually make it part of the negotiation. You just say, hey, look, this dress code thing's important. I know you all wear ties. Don't do that in the Austin office. Let's make that part of the agreement. And maybe you get it and maybe you don't, but if you don't ask for it, you're definitely not going to get it. So as you might imagine, tail end of the story, we're from corporate and we're here to help, generally ends the same way. people started to be dissatisfied with the post-acquisition environment. They started to drift off. The best performers left, et cetera. So it's a self-inflicted wound for sure. And so back to like figuring out what it is that is important in your culture, and what it is that is important in your values.
So really just spending the time and writing those down, right? Spend the time and write down all the values that are of importance to you.
Yeah, and values.
Honestly, I don't know if I would have thought about writing down dress code.
Yeah, me either, and that's part of why you do some research for the book to say, hey, let's go out there and hear about these stories from people where it's gone well and it hasn't gone well. And that was definitely one that popped up. In terms of going well, like here's the pattern that I see that helps this stuff go well. So it's one thing, you have to have them written down, and don't make up sort of BS values that you don't really believe. Like figure out just to answer, like, what do you care about? What's important to you? What's the culture like? Those kinds of things. How do you make decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Where I've seen it work really well is not just that first step. You also have to be willing to do reverse diligence. So I talk a lot about this in the book, where you've got to take the time to not just ask the question, but to ask a harder question. There's a moment, if you have an investment banker in your process or a broker, like if you're not asking questions that make your investment banker uncomfortable and get you a little bit of a talking to, you're probably not asking the hard questions. So I'll give you an example. The org chart. It's very common for people to never ask, show me the org chart of the combined businesses. Right? If it's a financial buyer or financial investor, the org chart's not going to change. But you might want to talk about nature of the board, those kinds of things. But if you're selling to a strategic, you've got to say, show me the org chart. Like show it to me in writing. Because you'll find some things in there that maybe you didn't expect. Like you didn't talk about, hey, you've got an earnout, but the whole sales department is going to move under national sales and you're not going to be responsible for that anymore. Well, how's that going to work if you have to rely on somebody else for your earnout? You might find out, because you never asked the question, that yes, you're going to run the business unit, but that's going to report to somebody that reports to somebody that reports to somebody that reports to the CEO. And that's not good or bad. You just got to know what you're getting yourself into. So being willing to take the time, including get on a plane, go to the company's headquarters, spend at least a full day there, just walking around and looking. I mean, as CEOs, we get some good instincts about some things. And one of those is if you walk around and you see people at headquarters are bright and cheery and engaged, and people are saying hi, and it looks like an interesting kind of fun place, that may be a good fit for you. And if you walk in and it's kind of dark and dour and everybody looks down, nobody will make eye contact, that's information as well. Like you need to know that. Now that may also fit your culture very well. Just make sure it's a fit. It takes extra effort though. You have to be willing to actually say, no, time for a pause. I'm going to get on a plane. Let's go spend some time in person. The usual process is like, oh, let's go have a dinner. And then that's about it. It's not enough.
So that's for an acquisition. So if you're looking to raise capital, which we're kind of combining these two conversations together, if you're looking to raise capital, would you do the same thing?
Get on a plane.
Really?
Get on a plane. Like we make so few irrevocable decisions in our life.
Right.
There are lots of things as CEO, you make a bad decision, you course correct, you move on. This is when you make a bad decision, you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
There you are. So there's risk reward on get on a plane is get on a plane, go to their headquarters. You're going to learn a lot. The other thing is, and this is true for both investments and for sale of the business, talk to the CEOs that have taken investments from them, or talk to the CEOs that have sold their company to that company. You're going to learn a lot in those conversations, and not just in what's said, but what isn't said. You'll notice which questions are they kind of dodging and
Right.
which do they run right into. It takes
good.
time.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think as entrepreneurs, when you're out trying to raise capital or sell your business, you're anxious and hungry to find those people that want to invest, and you're excited about it. So you might not want to ask those hard questions, but it's very important. Like you said, you get married to these people.
Well, so that's the thing. It's a little bit like the sales process.
Mhm.
Okay, salespeople don't ask hard questions. Really good salespeople ask uncomfortable questions
Mm-hmm.
where they might get an answer they don't want. And like that's the moment, right? You're good at sales. You're going to ask a question even if it gives you an answer you don't want, because it lets you take it out of the pipeline and quit working on it. But if you're sort of overly optimistic, oh, we had a good meeting. Well, do they have budget? Like, are they going to buy this? Who's in charge of it? Who makes the decision? Like all those kinds of questions, you might get a bad answer. But you get to hold on to hope that everything's going to be okay if you don't ask the hard question. You have to be willing to ask these hard questions.
Yeah.
And you touched on something there I want to make sure that we hit, because it's maybe one of the most important tier one things in this whole conversation. When you get into this mode of money and
Mm-hmm.
investment and selling the business, everybody's attention goes 100% on money. And part of the point of the book is that's not the difference maker. That the money part's going to get plenty of attention. All the accountants, all the lawyers, all the bankers, everybody trying to buy your thing or sell you a thing or give you investment, everybody's going to want to talk about money stuff. And what I'm telling you is that's part of it. But you have to get the other pieces right. If you get the money stuff right and nothing else right, you might be sad and rich. And I've seen it happen. It happens over and over again where people say, oh, God, I sold it to the wrong people and they're complaining. And, people kind of look at them and they laugh and they go, what are you crying in your jet? Like, how bad is it? It's very real. Like we put our lives into these businesses. This is not just a clinical transaction or a job. Like we live these things. What
It's
happens
true.
the day after the sale matters so much. So you're going to hear us go back over and over again. Like I don't actually talk about the money stuff a lot. Everybody else is going to want to talk about the money stuff. And I'm not saying don't worry about it. I'm just saying you have to care about all of the other things too, because no one else will. Because that's the real thing. There are some things that only a CEO can do. And that's things like get clear on your values, figure out what you're trying to accomplish, be willing to say no. All of these other things, it's 100% on you.
Such good advice. And you're speaking from experience too, because you actually did that, right? You sold your
Been
business
here.
when you wish you hadn't.
Yeah. Look, I got it wrong once. I'll probably get it wrong again, but I'm trying to improve the odds. So yeah, I learned. Look, the whole point of the book, the original idea here was I wanted to write the book that I wish I would have read 20 years ago.
Right. It's a great book. It's really good. Good information if you're looking to sell your business. And even if you're not looking to sell, it's a really good book to even start in preparation. So let's talk about that actually. So if we're considering, we've made the decision now that we're going to sell our business or we're going to raise some significant capital for the business, what do we need to start considering?
So a couple of things to consider, right? We talked about what am I trying to do? What do I care about? So once you've got those things down, I think it's important to start to understand your range of options.
Mhm.
So we'll go through a pretty good sized list, and it really is a pretty big list. But we'll talk about the first one. The first one is do nothing. Do nothing is always an option. You can start down a path and just decide, I'm not going to do anything. Now, we'll give you the other side of do nothing. And this, as an entrepreneur, might have been guilty of this before. I'm sure some of y'all have too. Is the one more year itis. So your company's here and you're growing and you go to market and you don't like the economic part that you hear. You're like, well, we're growing at 20% a year, so I'll just wait one more year. Somebody out there, maybe somebody listening to this right now, said one more year in late 2019.
Yeah.
And in March, right? And they may have another 2 years to rebuild their business. Look, some of these businesses rebounded very quick. They were right back, and some are still making progress, just trying to get back to where they were.
Right.
So that, yeah, you're growing 20% a year and one more year. Look, I've been through as CEO .com crisis that took out half my customer base in a 90-day period. 9/11, like
Mhm.
CEO 9/11, you're like one more year, you're like, uh-oh.
Right.
Imagine being in the hotel business. What
Exactly.
happens? Global financial crisis, the whole '07 through '09. There were a lot of businesses that went down by 60%.
So is the lesson here then, if you're thinking about selling, don't put it off another year? Is that
No,
the
the
first thing?
lesson is more like don't be greedy.
Okay.
It just it's what here's what I'm trying to create. That mental check when you start to go down the entrepreneur mode of I'm growing, that's not enough, just one more year it'll be up 20%. You're going to repeat that same conversation with yourself next year and
Sure.
you're going to do it again and again and maybe that's okay. I just want you to remember when you think that to yourself, that's not without risk. It may 100% be the best choice. Just remember stuff doesn't always go up and to the right. How are you feeling? And here's maybe a way to check in on this. If something happens in the world and it means you got to put another 3 years of full throttle into this business, is that exciting? Is that a challenge? You're like, I'm going for it. Or you're like, oh, that's terrifying and I'm exhausted. And if it's the latter, then maybe you want to think about going now. So the thing I'm trying to do here is just remember this moment in the podcast when you tell yourself just one more year and really check in.
Okay,
So
that was the first thing. Now you said you had four things to
yeah,
consider. What is
so find a strategic acquirer. We touched on that, and here's just to break it down. Like strategic acquirer means somebody's going to buy your whole company and fold it into their big company, and that can have extraordinary results, and it can be terrible. And we're from HR, and we're here to tell you about the dress code.
right?
It's again, none of these are good or bad. They're all just tools. So finding a strategic acquirer. You've got an insider sale, which happens sometimes, so you can effectively sell your ownership to a partner. You can sell your ownership to the team members and the employees. I see this happen a lot in professional services business, where they effectively you're transitioning the business from you as the majority owner to your team as the majority owner in an accounting firm or something like that. You can sell to a family office. You can take the company public, right? You may be big enough to actually go public.
Mhm.
You can find a financial buyer, so the sort of private equity crowd. And then the last choice, and this is what we tried to create at Satori, is more of an investment firm that's filled with operating background. So a lot of investment firms, most of the people that work there and most of the leadership, they have made their way in the world as investors. Not good or bad. It's a really useful perspective for what it's worth. I would be a better CEO now than I was before I was in this job because I got to see the silly stuff I did. I'm like, ooh, I did that in board meetings. Yeah, okay. So I've learned a ton. So that perspective is important. Our belief is that having actually done the work makes for better board members and better investors. So part of the point about Satori was not just the conscious capitalism piece, but was to have a bunch of ex CEOs and COO types. And so those are the different kinds of capital that are out there, and they all have different pluses and minuses. As an example, I mentioned right if somebody's going to work with us, um, on day one we're ready to go. We're super excited and because we're long term, we could be here another 10 years. So we're not a really good fit if somebody actually is kind of ready to step back and not work as much and so forth. There may be other folks that are a better fit, but that's the range of options.
Okay. So in chapter 4 of the book, you talk about the conscious seller, where basically everyone is a stakeholder, from the employees to the management to the vendors to the customers. Everyone is a stakeholder. What do you mean by that? And how did you even come to this?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second part first. Like, how did I come to this idea? I grew up outside a lot, kind of an outdoors kid. Our family always had a garden. Uh, and I remember learning about nature and about science. And one of the things that shows up regularly in nature is all these things are interconnected. Right? If you spray the garden to get rid of the bad bugs, guess what? That spray kills the good bugs too. There's interconnectedness there. And so if you sort of go out in nature, like everything is interconnected in nature. And so when I got into business, that pattern started to show up again and again. A thing I do for a customer today, give them the benefit of the doubt or treat them poorly, there will be an echo of that later on. If I have a great culture and people love working for the company, that may show up in my customers as well. My customers may have this wonderful experience. Everybody I talk to at your company is so happy and they love working there, and your customers want to be closer to you. So I kind of came to this. I had a little bit of a bias towards it based on what I learned just kind of out in the woods and in the garden science. And then I started to experiment. So as my first company started to get bigger and bigger, I was hiring in people from outside, very successful executives, dealing with all the Wall Street types. And what I noticed more and more was this really tight focus on short-term profit at the expense of like everything else.
Mm.
And it didn't feel right to me. But as a young CEO, I was in my 20s, like, well, people, I probably should listen. And so I would try this stuff. And it didn't feel right. And it turned out it didn't work. So I got to sort of do the lab in my own business of, if we have a great culture, what are the implications of that? How do you treat people like you care about them? How should I think about, as an example, the spirit of the contract or the letter of the contract? And by the way, there's no right answer on this one. It's a complicated question. That's why I'm using it. Thinking about, there's some term in the contract that says your customer owes you $1 million, but that wasn't actually the spirit of the deal. What do you do? How do you deal with that? Like, some of us would go, well, it's obvious. Like, why would I send them that bill? It's not fair. Some people would say, well, it says it in the contract in black and white. I'm sending the bill even if it wasn't part of the deal. So this idea of interconnectedness is really important. And I think part of where it starts, though, is you actually have to care about other people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you care about your employees? Do you really actually care about them? Do you care
Right.
about your customers and so forth? And that begins the genesis of this idea of being a conscious seller, to say, look, when I go to sell a business, I'm going to figure out, who are all these people we call stakeholders? Who cares that your business exists? And what is it that I want for them? Is there something important for my customers that I'm trying to solve for? As an example, you may be trying to bring a new capability to your customers that actually selling to a strategic will bring more value to your customers, help them accomplish something. Or maybe we had a company that we exited. Our leadership team got to run a much bigger company. While they bought our company, they put our team in charge of the combined business. Well, we cared about them. It was a great outcome for them. So figuring out who you care about and what it is that you want for them in a transaction, I think, would be the last piece.
Well, you're the first person I've ever heard to put it in that state. I've never actually even spoken to any other, private equity or investors that have looked at a conscious, buyer and seller. I mean, being a conscious seller and making sure that all the stakeholders are being thought of.
I
That's
hope
really
there are more of us in the future.
That's really very nice, Sonny. Okay, I want to go back to where we talked about, finding the right buyer. You've got to ask the hard questions, and you said ask for the org chart. What are some other questions if we're looking for that right buyer? What are other questions that we need to be asking? The hard ones.
The hard ones. I think let's dig in a little bit on this org chart thing.
Okay.
One of the things the org chart's going to tell you is like what's going to happen to the team. Right. In a strategic buyer situation, all of the team may not make it.
Mhm.
Somebody in accounting that may say, look, your job is in Chicago and you can have it in Chicago, but it's in Chicago. Are you going to move or not? So actually digging into what's going to happen to my team members. And again, this is one of those, you don't want to ask the question, because if you ask the question and you get an answer you don't like, now you got to do something with it. And I see that pattern. So that's going to be true for a lot of these questions. If you have the knowledge, now you have to deal with it. And so you don't want to ask the question, because if you don't ask it, you have plausible deniability. You go, oh, I didn't know. Well, now you know.
Mhm.
So here's a question. What is your strategy and how do we fit in that? So and there's a flavor of this question that's also kind of a private equity or investor question. Why are you interested in the company? What is it that you see here that has you excited? Like, most investors will look at hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses a year. Tell me what you saw that got you excited. You may hear something that you're like, oh, I didn't think of that. You may hear something like, that's great. That's exactly the path I'm on. You may actually hear something that's like, I don't want to do that. Like, that's a bad plan. So asking, it's, again, to go back to the sales thing, it's a little bit like asking a customer, why do you want to buy our stuff? A little scary, because
Mhm.
they might go, that's a great question. I don't know. Asking both financial and strategic buyers, why do you want to buy my company, or why do you want to invest in my company? That gives you real insight into what's going on behind the scenes, right?
Right.
There are conversations that happen without you in all of these transactions. You're trying to get a lens into what are they saying behind the scenes. Um, I'm going to tell a story here about one of our portfolio companies. We had somebody come to me and say, "Hey, we're interested in your portfolio company." I said, "Oh, okay, I'm listening. Like, what is it that's interesting?" And they said, "Well, we think there's too much capacity in the industry." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, what does that mean?" I said, "Well, we think we'll probably just shut the plant down." I'm like, "Huh. What about the leadership team?" And they thought about it for a minute and they said, "Well, I guess we have all the leadership team we need, so we don't really need them either." So just a couple of little questions. Now, silly them, like they were like, well, they're a financial buyer. All they're going to care about is money. Um, they didn't even go look at our website. Like, try to BS me something. It's like, yeah, we're going to buy your company. We're going to shut the plant down, fire everybody, fire your leadership team, etc. All I had to do was ask.
Yeah.
But they're never going to tell me that if I don't ask. No one's going to come and say, yeah, we want to buy your company and we're going to shut it down and fire everybody.
And the point of them doing that is really because they didn't want the additional competition out there at play with them, or why would they do that?
Yeah. They're like, hey, if we get rid of everybody except for maybe the salespeople, there will be less competition in the industry. We have
Right.
plenty of capacity in our plant, et cetera. So just by asking the question, they told me that they were going to shut the business down and fire everybody.
Right.
So as you might imagine, I was like, oh, okay, thanks for the info. I'm
Yeah.
never, like the inside voice was like, I'm never calling these people. And if
Yeah.
they ever show up and try to buy it, it's a hard no from day one. No, there's nothing you can tell me. And so here's the downstream question. I started to reflect on this and say, okay, here's some more in there. How much more does a buyer have to pay if you know they're going to fire everybody the day the transaction closes?
Okay.
It's a real question.
Yeah.
Um, and it's fun to watch CEOs sort of process through that question. You got a big camp that's like, well, no, there's not even a number. Just stop talking. It'll never happen. Um, and then you get a lot of the other ones who are like, well, if I could give everybody 3 years salary from that money, I might do it. Okay, that's not terrible. I think everybody says, here's 3 years salary. You got plenty of time to go find your way. But
Right.
what was really surprising was, and actually inspiring, was the number of CEOs that said, no way, there's
Yeah.
no chance. So we're back to, why do you want to buy this thing? Or why
Right.
do you want to invest in my company? It's a dangerous question.
Yeah, it sounds like to me the questions of the thoughts that you're having, and you think that they're hard. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't ask that question. That's a really difficult question. Maybe I don't want the answer to that. Those are probably the questions you need to ask, right?
That's right. Those are the questions that leave you with a little bit of a like pit feeling in your stomach because they're scary. Those are the important ones. The easy ones, doesn't
Right.
matter. The scary, hard ones that it could be the end of the transaction. You want to try to ask those early too, so you don't
Right.
get way into it and so forth.
And waste a lot of time. Okay, let's talk about through the selling process. You talk about in the book about it's important to hit your numbers, which we all agree to. But what about what's happened, with the pandemic and people quite possibly didn't hit their numbers? What do you say to that?
Yeah. So lots of companies didn't hit their numbers. The first thing you have to do is just be straightforward about what happened. What did you see? Like, this is not a time. So one of my overarching pieces of advice is like, build credibility. Like, when you're talking to a potential investor and they say, how much revenue did you have last year? You say, well, 20 million. And then they get the financials a week later and it was 19.1. You're
Mhm.
not building credibility when you do that, right? It's too much. And it happens in entrepreneurial land. You got to paint this big picture of the world and everything's awesome and you're a rounder upper. Uh, Sometimes when you do that, you lose credibility, and be really careful about losing credibility, right? You want to be direct and straightforward, and kind of everybody knows. Like, and look, some businesses the pandemic accelerated. just be honest about what happened in the pandemic. Don't try to gloss over stuff, and be able to be really precise and specific. Like this happened with this amount, etc. Like this is not a good time for kind of slinging answers. Just you need to prepare in advance.
Right.
Get it all clear, get it written down. Here's exactly what happened. Here's exactly how it affected us. And most importantly, here's our plan going forward. Here's what we learned from the pandemic. Here's how we changed our business model. We have lots of CEOs that their business model changed as a result of the pandemic, where they learned some things about their business because it was under extreme pressure. But having a really clear plan going forward. And again, I'm back to the beginning. Write it down. Write it
Right.
down. Write it down. Like no one wants to hear your cowboy. Pew, pew, I made up an answer in real time stuff. Get out ahead of it. Like, what's your plan? What are you doing? How has the pandemic improved your business? And also be able to explain how you mitigated the effects of it. Right,
Right.
as a buyer or as an investor, people are always like you're kind of selling the past, but they're really buying the future. To the
Hmm.
extent you can be really clear about, look, here's what we did. Here was how we mitigated the effect of revenue went down 30%. That can a lot of times build credibility because the person on the other side of the table understands you know how to deal with the business if the next bad thing happens, because it's business, man. It's just stuff happens all the time.
Right.
You have the capacity to deal with it and figure out a plan and so forth.
Right. Okay. All right. So you also talk about in the book that you need to go for the good deal and not the fair deal. What do you mean?
So I learned this from my business partner, Randy. And I think it was a really insightful way to frame the difference between a good deal and a fair deal. Um, you may find yourself in a position where the thing somebody asks for is totally unfair. But if you step back from the whole deal and ask yourself, like, is this a good deal or not a good deal? It's that's the deciding point as whether or not you do the thing anyway because it's a good deal, or you get wrapped up about this one. And usually it goes like this: it's this one term, it's something that the investor asked for that's totally unfair in your mind. It may not actually be unfair, it doesn't matter to you. You're like, that's completely unfair, I can't believe they're asking for that, da da da, and you get all worked up and you'll talk yourself out of making a great partnership over this one thing, when if you step back and look at the entirety of the deal, you go, this is a good deal. And I have seen this happen. It's natural. It happens to me too. Like I have to, part of the reason I put it in the book, I have to remind myself, like, hey, this thing you're all stirred up about, yeah, it matters, but it matters in context of everything else. So that's really the point: is don't get wrapped up about the one thing. You have to look at it in context with everything else in the deal and say, is this a good deal or not? Never mind of whether or not this term is fair or not fair.
I think it's hard because as entrepreneurs, these businesses become, I mean, they're your babies, right? You've built them from
Yeah,
scratch and you have such an emotional tie to them so that when something does seem unfair, you take it very personally. And what you're saying is step back and don't get so fixated on this one thing, right? Look at the overall.
that's right.
Yeah, very good. Great. Okay, so let's talk about how, because I know it's, as an entrepreneur with lots of different startups, um, I've given equity to employees in the past, and you talk about how it can actually be unrewarding. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
It's a funny thing. And at Satori, we have everybody in the company gets to participate on sort of the success of the business. So I'm going to say a bunch of stuff, and then you're going to be like, "But wait a minute, he doesn't do that." And it's okay. I understand the conflict there. Um, my experience has been this: not everybody appreciates the equity.
Hmm.
As an owner, you have an ownership mentality and usually an ownership time horizon. And what I've seen pretty regularly is that a number of your team members, that it's just air to them. So you've given them this thing that's like so deeply important. You gave them a part of your child, and
Hmm.
it's this enormous thing for you, and they're like, "Oh, thanks." And 6 months later, they've totally forgotten about it. And they're in your office. You're like, I want more bonus. And you're like,
But
you
wait,
give you some equity. You're part owner of the business now. Like, what's going on here? It's because you gave them a thing that was worth $1 to you and 3 cents to them.
right.
And so a big part of this conversation is meeting people where they are and what's most important to them. And so for many people, the time horizon for the equity, and you may never sell. Some companies have had the same owners for 50 years. So
Hmm.
people may not, the real point here is people may not relate to equity in your business the same way that you relate to it. And so don't be surprised if you give it to somebody and they care about it less than you do. And I think everybody should have equity. Like, that's the tension here is I want everybody in the company to participate in the growth and success and development of the company. And a lot of times when you give equity, people aren't going to appreciate it. And you might have been better off saying, you know what, let me raise their base. Let
Hmm.
me add more bonus to the
Okay.
mix so that as they perform, then they're rewarded for that, but on a shorter term basis, on an annual basis or something like that. And sometimes you might even ask, you could just talk to your team kind of one on one and say, hey, I was thinking about doing something for you related to your company or your performance and the company's performance. I kind of have two choices. I could maybe make your bonus target a little higher, or I could give you some equity ownership. Let's talk about it.
Hmm.
You might be surprised at what you find there. Some people, and again, it's a wiring level thing. Some people are like, oh my gosh, I'll do anything for the equity. And some people are like, wow, let's talk about that bonus. Those,
Right.
those are
Exactly.
all okay. The thing I'm trying to get here is meeting people where they are, what's most important to them. The equity is a big deal to you. It may not be a big deal to them. I am going to give you the other side of this, though. Um,
What's that?
Particularly when you're hiring executives,
Hmm.
equity becomes really important. And I have seen quite a few founders and owners being unwilling to part with equity to get great executives. And I want you to think about two companies. One company has the average executive that came from down the street,
Hmm.
and the other company has a top 10% in the nation executive. And their whole management team is filled with top 10% in the nation executives, and they're your competitor, and you're filled with, yeah, they're fine. They do a nice job. How does that play out over time?
Yeah.
By and large, with and this is true of all leaders, but I'm speaking specifically to the team that reports directly to the CEO, and as the company gets bigger, the team that reports to them. My experience is the very best executives won't take the job without some equity. They're like,
Right.
no, thank you, because they want to participate in the upside. And I have seen CEOs hold it deeply, tightly. I'll never give equity to anybody. We interviewed a team. Um, the CEO was the owner, and he had a COO number two that was really good. And we got to talking to the CEO or the COO alone. And the first thing he wanted to talk about was he's been promising me equity for 20 years, and I still don't have the paperwork.
But
Wow. Like, can
he
you
was
imagine? So,
there. He
yeah.
was there.
The other piece is like these promises of equity that don't turn into paper.
Right.
They may seem real to you because you're like, oh, I would never, gyp them
Not
at the end of it.
real.
I wouldn't do that. Um,
Yeah.
that's not how they perceive it. This was the most important issue on this person's mind.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do it, you got to really do it and write it down.
That's interesting. Okay. So, all right. So, Sonny, you've seen so many different business owners come to you looking for Satori to step in and invest or to work with them. What are you seeing as the number one mistake over and over and over by business owners, entrepreneurs?
So, and for us, our stage of life, we tend to invest in larger businesses. So these are companies with kind of 7 to 50 million of annual profits.
Okay.
And these problems don't change. They're the same at 10 million of revenue as they are at 100 million of revenue. Where the whole thing goes awry is when somebody is thinking as an owner only about transaction day, not the day after.
Interesting.
Remember earlier when I talked about like no one else is going to care about all this stuff? Everybody that's involved in this transaction, when it's done, closing day, woo, let's throw a party. They move on to the next thing. And guess what? You get to live with the consequences of your actions, good or bad.
Right.
So if you move your time horizon just a little bit to the day after the sale, now how do I feel? Here's what happens to my employees. Here's what's happening to my customers. Here's what happened in my own personal life. The day after the sale is actually the most important day.
And if you've done all your homework, right, with really going and checking these people out, maybe it's not going to be such a bad next day, right?
That's right. You can get it right. You can get it right. You just have to do it a little differently than what all the advisors and everybody's trying to rush you to the end and talk about money. Only a CEO can say, stop. I've got some questions. Let's talk about what happens to my customers, what happens to my team, who am I going to report to, what's the expense policy, what's the direct, whatever matters, right? You've got all these things that may matter. You're the only one that gets to do that, and you have to actually do it.
Okay, so if you're going to give one piece of advice to an entrepreneur who's looking to raise capital or to sell his business, what's that going to be?
Price is not the only thing that matters. There's a lot more in this than just price. It's important, but it is not the only thing. To figure out what else matters, you have to take the time to get clear enough about it to actually write it down. You write it down, look at it, go back to it again, make sure that's what you really want. You'll get the price stuff worked out. If you can get clear about what you really want, you might actually get it.
That's great advice. That's great, Sunny. Sunny, you've got so much great content. Hold up your book so everybody can see. Selling, not selling out, right? Selling without selling out.
Selling
Where
without selling out.
they can get the book on Amazon, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's a great book, everyone. So I highly recommend going and picking it up. If you're thinking at all about raising capital or potentially selling your business, absolutely, it's a must read for everyone. So, and actually, if you're not even thinking about raising capital or selling, it's still got great content in there about running your business and how to look at your business. So, Sunny, what a great, great honor to have you here today. Thank you for today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, this was great. All right, everyone. So until next week, where Karen Golden, the CEO of Hint Beverages, will be our guest next week. So look forward to seeing you again at Business Acceleration 2.0. Until then, stay safe and God bless. And there we go. Sunny, thank you. That was great. That was really, really good.
Thanks. Happy to do it. Any tune-ups for me?
Pardon?
Any tune-ups for me?
No, you were fantastic. We'll edit this and send you a copy. And then when we go live with it, you can push it out as well and people can tune into it. So you can put it on your social media. Yeah, great content. I'm not surprised.
Yeah,
The book is really good.
Appreciate that. And as if you go through it, I'm always trying to be a little bit better next time. So any feedback you have on, hey, that worked really well, or hey, this piece over here, like, don't do that. That was a mess. I take it just in the spirit of continuous improvement. Yeah,
I would get that from you. But honestly, it was really good. I interview I've got over 125 interviews now, but even from the speaking business, the experience of speaking as well, right? So you were great. Fantastic.
Thank you
really
much.
Good information. So if you're up for doing more of this kind of stuff, we've got chapters that we're opening up all around really North America right now, Mexico, Canada, and all over the US. But if you're ever up for doing it, if there's certain cities you want to go into or you're interested in, we have chapters that your content would be fantastic for.
Great. I appreciate that. And so in this context, you're thinking about this sort of in-person talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. If you're interested in doing it.
Yeah, I would say generally Zoom's a better format for me. It's tough to go deep. And I think part of it is the sort of size challenge for me, right? Our businesses tend to be in the 35 to 300 million range, kind of it's a wide zone, but it's pretty good sized businesses.
And ours are much smaller than that, obviously. Yeah.
So it might be tougher for me to do the in-person stuff.
Okay, but I'll
appreciate the offer, but
you'd be interested in Zooms though, doing Zoom calls?
Yeah, drop me a line.
Okay.
Let's do it. See if if I can make a difference. I'm trying to leave the world a little better than I found it.
You're doing a great job. Well, thank you so much. We'll send the edited copy to you sometime. It's Friday, so it'll be sometime next week.
Wonderful. I'll look forward to it, and have a great weekend.
All right, you too, Sunny. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, Gage, we got all that. Aaron, he was good. I like him. Yeah. Okay. So next, no, because we did the opening. So